Hello.
Welcome. We'll give a couple of seconds to let people filter in here. And then we will get started. All right, welcome, and thank you all for coming to the readings tonight. I want to give a brief land acknowledgement before I hand over the mic to the proverbial mic to Sam Ligon, the artistic director for the Port Townsend Writers Conference. The Port Townsend Writers Conference is located at Fort Worden State Park in Port Townsend, Washington. The land on which Fort Worden sits and the waters that at our borders are the traditional territory of the S'Klallam and Chimacum people. Centrum and the Port Townsend Writers Conference honors the Salish people's thriving culture and their efforts to sustain their homelands. And now to Sam Ligon, artistic director for the Port Townsend Writers Conference.
Thank you, George. We have another great night of reading tonight, which we're going to get into. And like we've done each night before, we'll have our readings, and then we'll have some time at the end, hopefully about 15 minutes for some Q&A, and that's time for audience participation. Please post questions into the Q&A block, and then I'll relay them to our writers. So we're going to start tonight with Jourdan. So here comes her introduction. The city of Seattle's 2019 through 2021 civic poet, Jourdan Imani Keith, is a storyteller, essayist, playwright, naturalist, and activist. Her TEDx talk, Your Body of Water, the theme for King County's 2016 to 18 Poetry on Buses program, won an Americans for the Arts Award. Keith's Orion magazine essays, Desegregating Wilderness and At Risk, were both selected for the 2015 Best American Science and Nature Writing Anthology. She has been awarded fellowships from Hedgebrook, Wild Branch, Santa Fe Science Writing Workshop, Bona, and Jack Straw. Her poetry appears in Cosmonauts Avenue, Seattle Review of Books, and many other anthologies. Her memoir and essays, Tugging at the Web, is forthcoming from University of Washington Press. Too humble to say it herself, I'm pleased to say that Jourdan is the greatest living writer of all time. Please welcome her.
Sam, thank you. I love that you do that every time. So, yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and see sort of people, and amazing. I'm so excited to be reading with Jenny and Maya. Okay, I had to say that so I can calm down. And I want to say, update to the bio, I am actually civic poet through 2022. My term was extended thanks to, thanks to expressing the fact that I felt ripped off by, I don't know, a global pandemic. So yeah, I'm excited to read in public. We'll see. One piece I want to share with you, and I got to dedicate this reading to Jenny because your support and I'm going to call it love carried me through the really terrible beginning of all of this that happened. Yeah, as your student. Thank you. Okay. This is called See the Red Thread Fall. 1. Anne likes red, 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 red. 2, a new dress for Anne, a blue dress for Anne. 3, no, I like red, 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 red. 4, I don't like Anne. I stare at her as small as me, the flare of the black and white drawings, the bursts of color on her clothes. I close my cardboard book. I can't stand Anne. I could never behave like her. I like blue. I wear what my mother gives me to put on. 5, my father wears a suit He is still wearing it when he tells me to get the book I read today. My mother must have been proud, excited. Was I 4? 5, 6. I sit on the sofa. I open my book and stare. 7. I can't read it. I can't read it. I can't. This is my answer to my father's request. 8. What position was I in when he slapped me? What angle had shifted? Did he stand frustrated, disappointed? Had he read it? I wanted him to know there was something wrong with this book. I didn't have the words. I can't read it. I can't. 9. Perhaps this wouldn't be my earliest memory if my father ever forgot it. He's the one who told me the look I gave him. He's the one who let me know I had power. 10. My father, with the early silver in his hair, with his thick mustache, didn't he have words for what he wanted to say? He said I would not talk to him for days. Was it a day or days? Was it a day or hours? This is his memory, not mine. This is what he tells me. I only remember the book. I hate red. Red, red, red. 9. I didn't learn the word for what Anne had that I didn't realize I had until later, much, much later, when I taught environmental ed. 10. Make a circle, I say. It's a test for the group. What do they know yet about the world? Can they cooperate? It's a game called Everything's Connected. It's about ecosystems. We call it experiential learning. 11, I hold the big ball of red yarn in my hand. We are going to make a web with the thread between us. 12, it's not a thread, it is blood. It is the food we are for one another, as we are part of the food web. 13, earlier that week, a fawn died on the beach in the intertidal zone. From a distance, we could see the flies and bull kelp draping it. You have to be hardy to live there. Code switch, speak the language of tides, sometimes covered in salt water, sometimes at risk of desiccation. No day is the same, except there are 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day, in every season, in every year. Nothing is the same, except that. Is it changed when it's always the same? 14, someone usually has to be a leader if a leader is the person who speaks out. Step back, step up, make more room, make a circle. We are standing in the grass above the intertidal zone, not yet in the forest. 15, phytoplankton. Who eats phytoplankton? Toss the red between us. 16, zooplankton. Who eats zooplankton? Toss the red between us. 17, everything that eats everything is connected. Red seems so powerful, so privileged. 17, you cannot eat if you cannot breathe. 17, I like blue. 17, in California, in Wisconsin, in Washington, the blue babies are connected to the food web. There are nitrates from manure in their water. There are nitrates from poop and urine soup in their well. The water takes away the baby's breath. They cannot carry oxygen in their blood. This is an intrusive thought, like a nursery rhyme. Hi-ho, the dairy-o, the farmer takes a wife takes a child a nurse. Who makes its formula from the well water? The nurse, a cow. 18, on Orcas Island, the dock swims out into the sailor's sea, plank by plank. Then it stands in the water. Then we stand on it. At night, sometimes we could see the bioluminescent upwelling. I believe it was during the upwelling. When the cold water rises up, full of the nutrient-rich bottom of the ocean, everything feeds them, upwelling. Doesn't that sound like the knot that escapes your throat, unravels, gurgles up through your eyes, and the sounds you are making that could be words? Which mighty God called skin and eyes, called song and sinew, mouth open, mouth closed, breath held to be detritus walking, to be food for whales, to be a baling's feast? This is an intrusive thought. How a blue whale helps me to breathe. How a gray whale helps me to breathe. 19, I want a blue thread. 20, some whales, the bathing whales, feed in the dark. They eat at the depths where the light does not reach, the cold dark. When they rise, they bring the cold water with them, more than the waves of the ocean, more than the wind. And they poop. They fertilize the light. Poop, plumes of poop for phytoplankton, plant plankton, which produces more oxygen than trees. Most of our oxygen comes from the ocean. 21, the children are sad when the red thread falls, when one species that is connected to another cannot eat. 22, I want blue, 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 blue. We cannot eat if we cannot breathe. 23, my ancestors were thrown in chains to the bottom of the ocean. When they were detritus, did the baleen whale catch them in the brush of their teeth? This is an intrusive thought. 24, I was bored by plankton toes. The long white mesh sock that looks like a malformed Christmas stocking, the steel circle at the top to keep it open. Okay, kids, pull it up. Take some drops, put them on the slide, try again. There you go. Look at the laminated card. Yes, it's a barnacle. Zooplankton, that will be a barnacle. Yes, some will stick to a rock. Some will stick to a whale. They are sessile, stuck on the whale's body. 25, I like blue. Sometimes when I look at the veins in my hand, at the blood that appears blue, I take a deep breath. I do not thank the ocean. I do not thank the whale. I do not thank the plankton, but I could. 26, reimagine the game. Form or circle, step up, step back. 27, Anne likes red, 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 red. 28, at the National Portrait Gallery in London, you can see her standing next to red, her alabaster fingers a few inches from her red crown. The 1702 portrait is on the gallery website under Abolition of Slavery. The details read, Queen Anne continued the tradition of royal support for the British slave trade. In 1712, she announced that she had secured an exclusive contract for the British nation to provide enslaved Africans for the Spanish West Indies for 30 years. The government sold the contract to the newly founded South Sea Company for 7.5 million lira. Queen Anne also secured over 20% of the stock for herself. 28, I don't like Anne. 29, I hold the ball of blue yarn. Phytoplankton. Who depends on phytoplankton? Thank you. Bye.
Nice job, Jourdan. Thank you. Our next reader, Jenny Boully. I think this is Jenny's first time here. It's the first time here I know at least 12 or 14 years. Is that true, Jenny?
Yes, this is my first time
We're glad you're here.
ever. Yeah, thank you for
Welcome.
having me.
Jenny Boully is the author of Betwixt and Between, Essays on the Writing Life. Her previous books include Not Merely Because of the Unknown That Was Stalking Toward Them, The Book of Beginnings and Endings, Essays, One Love Affair, Of the Mismatched Teacups, Of the Single Serving Spoon, A Book of Failures, and The Body, an essay. A half child, she was born in Thailand and grew up on the southwest side of San Antonio, Texas, where she was first recognized as the greatest living writer of all time. She has earned undergraduate and graduate degrees from Collins and the University of Notre Dame, and a PhD in English from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. A recipient of a 2020 Guggenheim Fellowship, Jenny teaches at Bennington College and the Bennington Writers Seminars. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm having a great time, and it's so lovely to read with Jourdan and Maya. Thank you so much. So I'm going to read an essay about the time that my mother just begged me to get a tattoo. And I made a journey overseas to do so. It's called On the Eve of My Eternal Marking. On the eve of my eternal marking. My son wants to know why flies are even a thing. He wants to know why bugs are even a thing. They bother him. I get it. I too have his sensitivities. On the other side of the world, where our real lives reside, Chicago winters coerce living things to slumber or die. Not so here in Thailand, where life announces itself in its full verdancy and fecundity, unending, its tight and insistent tendrils ever unfurling. Tomorrow I will receive the sacred blessing of a sakyant, a talismanic, ancient, protective, and mystical stick and poke tattoo from one of the most revered spiritual masters in Thailand. This, however, was not a decision I made for myself. My mother said she had a premonition. It was overwhelming. She told me I needed this tattoo for protection. Such tattoos are simply part of Thai culture, especially as it is lived by the peasant class, a class that, without power or money or resources, depends on luck and superstition to bank their hopes and dreams and visions of someday. Superstition or no, my mother says I need the protection and soon. So here I find myself in the country of my birth on the eve of an eternal marking. It is more than a mere mark, like baptism or confirmation. Getting a sakyant is ceremony, a pronouncement that one has made a significant life choice. With this mark, I am making the choice to be mindful of the spiritual dimension. In other words, I will have to believe that there is something to believe in. I tell my son that bugs are a thing because God made them. My children, who are not brought up religiously, know I use the word loosely. What I mean by God is something greater, a mystery, a deep unknowing that touches us and perhaps makes the flowers beautiful or worse for wear. My son corrects me. God didn't make bugs, he says. God made life. According to this worldview, whatever happened after that just happened. Bugs just happened. But life made it possible for bugs to happen. I know that things just happen. I just happened to lose a pearl earring on the flight here. I took the earrings off in the middle of an awful wake and sleep, toss and turn, nauseating airplane slumber, and just tossed them in my bag without properly securing them. It was a bittersweet loss because the pearls served as proof, a visible mark that I, a poor girl, had made it. I attended a women's college in the South where girls from well-to-do families wore their pearls even as they burned off their tiny salads on the treadmills. As a student there, I didn't own pearls. And even though I eschewed money and what it represented, I thought their pearls were beautiful. I pined for their pearls. I wanted the luster, the shine they bestowed. But more, I wanted the sense of self-worth, of belonging, of status and surety, even if these things were merely fabrications of my own mind, informed by and easily persuaded by my insecurities. When I got my first salaried job for $25,000 a year as an editorial assistant for an academic publisher in Manhattan, I bought myself discounted from Overstock.com pearl earrings, one of which is apparently lost forever, perhaps stuck in a crack underneath seat 64E en route to Hong Kong as we speak. My son is bothered by all the flies in this country. My daughter seems to be the food choice for mosquitoes. Despite their insect woes, my children are luckier than I was at their age. I didn't visit Thailand until I was 17. For my family, it was hard won. I had not fully considered that there existed another world to consider. Until my first visit, Thailand and my mother's sufferings and poverty were mere abstractions. And although my children did not know my Thai grandmother, nor live in her little shack, or poop in her outhouse in the old world toilet, or force that poop into the septic tank by pouring water into that old world toilet, or sleep in sweaty sheets under the mosquito netting without air conditioning, they have so much more to consider here. They have seen the little girl across the street who lives among piles of broken glass. They have seen the little cat eating grass outside the noodle shop, vomiting right there in front of us. They have seen the flies that land on the little shop's table. They have seen how effortlessly I exchange my bills for baht. They have seen how little can be. Despite my mother's flight to the United States and her hard-earned financial stability, and despite my being a professor with a PhD, here, I am still of the peasant class. I will always be. I am unsophisticated. I am of the country. I am not the daughter of an educated Bangkok doctor like the Thai girls I met in college. I speak differently. My word choices, my expressions, my way of speech gives me away. Peasant, my Thai words say, no matter what I say. Or perhaps these characterizations are mere fabrications of my insecurities. I wear my pearl earrings practically every day. I suppose, however, that I should lean here on past tense. I can no longer wear what I no longer possess. I should say, before I lost one, I would wear my pearl earrings practically every day. I wore them almost always. They were, in essence, part of my identity, part of my very body. My face does not seem right without them. My face then is no longer my face. Losing my pearl means losing what I have held as my identity, as my visage, as my look for almost 2 decades now. Tomorrow, my body will be irrevocably altered. Things can just happen. Things are the way they are. I will trade one identity for another. I will say goodbye to the girl who wanted so badly to be acknowledged, who grew up between nothing and a heartbeat, who felt that she had to try harder, work harder for anything at all. But this too, I know, can't be accomplished simply by my banishing the empirical symbol of my imagined status. The pearl, after all, is merely a pearl. And is a sakyant by the most revered master of these numinous tattoos merely a tattoo? Or is it something truly sacred, holy, powerful, endowed? My mother loves to tell the story of how my little sister, narrowly escaping what would have been a fatal car crash, called on her tattoo, called on the teachings of the master, and that is why she avoided what would have been certain death. Before my little sister got her tattoo, my mother had a premonition similar to the one she had about me, and she called on something greater to ask what she could do to protect her daughter. My little sister, who slithered into the darkness, who fell into a place where we could no longer reach her, came back to life after getting her sakyant. But why is life even a thing? That is the question that I'm terrified of my children asking. After my first trip to Thailand, I went to college and I learned what cashmere was. I still didn't know to wear a scarf when it got cold. My hallmates came back from winter break with beautiful J. Crew sweaters. I took a sociology course, Introduction to Anthropology. I remember one classmate in particular wore pearls so big they were cartoonish. Indeed, her pearls were a bit reminiscent of Wilma Flintstone's. We watched a film in which foragers found bird nests full of baby birds. The girl with the cartoon earrings flinched at the savage scene of the third world inhabitants collecting their supper. I felt ashamed by her looking away. I felt shame for the world I had just left. In anthropology, I learned that ceremony is brief, that the buildup is long, that the pinnacle is passed before one even knows it. Then it's downhill, a denouement, a return to the mundane of the everyday. Ritual is sublime, but like all things that radiate sublimity, the experience of it is so otherworldly as to evade memory or even temporal bearings. I wonder then whether life itself is ritual, ceremony. Perhaps life itself is the apex of something greater and unknown. That would mean then that life itself, and by life here, I mean life with all its platitudes, its housekeeping, its cooking, its child rearing, its labors and horrors and joys, all is ethereal. Life is there, and then things happen. I admit to having lingered too long in the darkness. I too have sewn a black veil over me. I would be lying if I said that I didn't fear the premonition that my mother had for me. If my mother has taught me anything, she has taught me that she is always right. I fear that I will need this tattoo. I have chosen a design by the master himself. It is a design imbued with powers to give the bearer, quote, massive success in everything. The tattoo, however, doesn't just give things to the bearer. The bearer has to work hard, and the harder the bearer works, the harder the tattoo works too. Fortunately for me, being of the peasant class has taught me that life is hard work. Life, I know, is a made thing. It doesn't exist without me and my hands and my labors and my ambitions. If that tattoo serves merely as a reminder that I myself have to make it, then I'll take it. And so I would be lying too if I said that I didn't believe that there is something to believe. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. That was awesome. Our next reader is Maya. Maya Jewell Zeller is the author of the interdisciplinary collaboration with visual artist Carrie DeBacker, Alchemy for Cells and Other Beasts, the chapbook Yesterday, the Bees, and the poetry collection Rustfish. Her prose appears in such journals as Gettysburg Review, Booth, Bellingham Review, and the anthology This is the Place, Women Writing About Home. Recipient of a Promise Award from the Sustainable Arts Foundation, as well as a residency in the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forests, Maya is Associate Professor of English for Central Washington University, Poetry Faculty for Western Colorado's Low Res MFA program, and Poetry Editor for Scabland's Books. She's currently at work on a memoir titled Raised by Ferns, and another memoir tentatively titled I Never Asked to Be the Greatest Living Writer of All Time. Please welcome Maya Jewell Zeller.
Thanks, Sam. I want to thank Jenny and Jourdan for those really beautiful readings. Both of those were just extremely resonant with me, and I'm honored to read with both of you tonight, so thank you. I also want to thank George for all of your work to get the conference going. And finally, I would like to thank Sam, who, like all of us, is the GOAT, the greatest living writer of all time, as you know, but also what you may not know is that Sam is the GLAD, the greatest living artistic director of all time, or, you know, GLAD like a trash bag. So also that. And I think we can all agree, Sam brings levity and incisive wit into every room that he enters, be it one with a winged podium or one with so many faces that we all feel slight amounts of dread and panic. This panic is Sam's fault. The panic you're feeling when you enter these rooms is all because of Sam. Anyway, thanks, Sam, for all you've done in your time as the GLAD, the greatest living artistic director of all time of Centrum's Port Townsend Writers Conference. I just wanted to thank you and tell you that we love you before I read. So thanks, Sam. Okay. I'm going to read, much to Sam's chagrin, I'm going to read some essays. So this is, it was The Sound of a Cloud Looking at Itself, and it's from the memoir manuscript. Whenever I am walking in the woods and see a large horizontal chunk of basalt covered in moss, I remember that whale on a beach when I was a girl. It was large and stinking and completely out of place. I mean, I know a whale and a beach go together, like the wind filling the gray-green limbs and clicking them, like the sound of water on white water before the rain, or this large moss rock in the forest in the foothills near the mountains. But these mountains are dry, drier than those full of moss, and whales on beaches should only stay long enough to eat the seals. And those are orca whales, black and white, like an argument. This was a gray whale, dead, its body the whale's own elegy. You know what I mean if you've ever stayed long enough on a beach, long enough to find a dead thing. It isn't long. Now, if you go to any ocean, you'll find the whole stretch of beach littered with bodies, those sand dents around them, the air kelpish, a brown smell. This is how we do beaches in 2020. The absent sea stars, the hollow crabs, those sweet little shrimp that truly burrow into the tide pool bottoms, leaving their ass calligraphy. Well, I can feel my heartbeat in my thumb. I wonder if a whale hears its heart coming back to it over the blue water. When my son runs too far into the forest so I can no longer see him, I close my eyes and think his name, a trochee, an ah and an held in like a heartbeat in a uterus, corralled by C and N and Y and N. I think it like two gray notes that gallop out from my throat over the snowberry and bracken fern, those brown waves. Beautiful brown waves. A red flash of the thermal I've dressed him in, that triangle swatch of orange on his geometric coat. He laughs and I taste summer, a stained palmful of berries. The forest full of quiet birds, their songs resting. The branches clack. I imagine my feet as webbed. I want to get home before the wind turns rough. When finally I read the opening to that popular whale book, I was surprised to find 4 pages of Balaenoptera epigraphs preceded by a brief etymology. All of those whale obsessions, orca, minke, white, gray, blue. When I conceptualize it, it's the 300-pound heart strung up in a museum, its ventricles wide enough to crawl into, the veined topography of its chambers like human skin. I think of how it resembles a large suspended testicle, how they look when relaxed, after sex or a shower. Page 3 of Moby Dick, it was something like, this animal was named for roundness or rolling, how I think the flesh rolls, how one rolls over and then under like a swell of water and next to and all that salt. I sing things into the woods how I do on paper, remind myself not to show anyone. But then the large clouds full of rain and how an outbuilding seems like a good place to step off the trail. The lichen blossoming its open doorway. I think I want to go in there and mouth the fairy tale of how my life began. I want you to really listen how an owl does for a mouse on the trail, or how a whale calf listens, or a woman. When Doris Lessing wrote, "Do you know what people really want, everyone? I mean, everybody in the world is thinking, I wish there was just one other person I could really talk to, who could really understand me, who'd be kind to me." She meant the way I feel about this large moss stone, the sheaf of paper in my backpack. She meant it the way I meant it. I know this is like a teenager. When I was 13, my art teacher asked my mother if I had always been 40. She said, well, she spends a lot of time in the barn. I was painting the crest of a wave on a stormy ocean. I had memorized another poem about a dead girl. I wanted my teacher to tell me his story, so I stayed after class cleaning out the yogurt containers full of paint residue, the high quality brushes. He had a beard and dark eyes. He let us chew gum in class. I want your teeth to be busy, not talking. I liked how the oil made streaks after it fell out in the sink, how I could control the pattern of it by squeezing my fingers in a rhythm against the soft, wet brushes, the water running through, the rivulets of some clear water and some color, the delta around the drain. David Baker wrote, I have been silent for a long time now. You know I am serious about the whales. I felt like that when I walked into this forest and then walked out. The sky was the same slate gray. It was nearly 3 o'clock, the air around me wanting to be beautiful. I went home and made dinner for my family, vegetables and lentils warm in a bowl. This is not a letter to Melville. It seems like I meant to say it, but I never found the right place. They call the study of whale songs acoustic research. While blue whales are known for their long, cohening songs that boom across the deep, gray whales, it is said, are likely to be recycling the air around themselves when they speak. Gray whales call in low-frequency moans, knocks, up and down, sweeps, and rumbles. They seem to have a lot to communicate, and they do. Scientists call them a highly acoustic whale, which is the kind I want to be. I don't think it will benefit anyone if I let this all go unsaid. I wonder the way we do when we get to the end of a country song, if the beginning is really answered. If this were a country song and not the song of a whale, would the large metaphor in the forest have gotten its point across? Is the moss its voice? I can't stop there, so I will just say, after my son was born and nearly didn't live, and then did, I figured out how to be who I was, and decided I was a person who told the truth. And I wanted to thank my students in my workshops this week for just being so attentive to their own, as they described them in their own words, slimy and slippery truths and memories, and the ways that we all this week are thinking in fragments, the way that Jenny talked about this afternoon in her craft talk. She talked about thinking and writing in fragments. And I think that's something that calls me into the genre of creative nonfiction. But I am going to close with a poem because I think that it's kind of fun to have a poem of place. And this is a poem that I wrote actually in Port Townsend after an experience in Port Townsend. And I know we're not all here, but many of us are called to this place. And so you remember when people used to go to karaoke on Thursday nights. This takes place partially in that space. So imagine me years and years ago, maybe a decade ago, in a space, coming to a conference after weaning my child and being in a space where I was having wine for the first time in a long time and going to karaoke nights for the first time in a long time. And that's where this begins. This is called Mrs. Robinson, Are You Trying to Seduce Me? It's how we always say it, but it turns out how we say it is wrong. Dustin Hoffman's character was never so sure of himself. What he really said was, Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me, aren't you? Which is a huge difference when you consider the misplaced caesura and how tonally he belies a lot about young Benjamin Braddock and 1960s America. And sometimes it's really the other way around. Mrs. Robinson just falls victim to another nice six-pack and she's bored and tired anyway, too tired for sex. So they talk. Since we're all being so honest here, I feel I should tell you about my whale dream, the one in which they swim past me while I'm tied to a chair on a small raft in the ocean, skimming over the waves, dusk all around us, and I don't mind because I'm so close to the water I can touch them, my fingers on their smooth backs as they breach and glide. And my friend Kate says, this dream is about when those twin 26-year-olds hit on us a few weeks ago, the ones who had a thing for MILFs, who wanted to fuck us, their moms singing karaoke in the next room, us playing doubles with them on the pool table, the rails rubber dull and the cloth faded, us winning, and me trying to let them down easy by explaining I was a high school teacher when they were in high school. The dream was peaceful until it wasn't. A large brown eel with a ridged back began to swim around and around the raft, its mottled barnacles, and the whales seemed unaware. I tried to save face, but maybe my friend was right to set us all straight. She said, we're not going to sleep with you. And we all blushed. And the one who had me in mind said, it could still happen. And we said it couldn't. And they knocked in the 8-ball too soon. And I can't help but notice now that ball's the same color as a killer whale. And maybe a therapist would really have a heyday with that. The game was over. We left the room. But my friend said maybe after all, we should have just kissed their faces just to see how it felt. If we're being honest with each other, I think I better tell you, I wasn't at all interested in kissing their sweet faces. If we're being honest, I should say the dream arrived after, in the night. It lasted hours. Me in that chair on that raft in the sea, the sky losing its grip on light like a good sleep, or a glass of wine when you haven't had wine in too long. And I was as relaxed as I've felt in years. I almost didn't want to wake, even after the eel began its beautiful orbit. And I knew we were all doomed. Me, the raft, the chair, my ropes, even the whales swimming toward where the sun had been, even the ocean, especially the ocean, the harbinger of all of it, all of us. Sure, I wanted to go on touching those beautiful orcas' backs, but I was also okay with whatever. Thanks.
Great, Maya. Is that the year Gary and I sang Tuesday's Gone?
It might have been.
Okay, we are ready for a little Q&A here. Panelists, you are welcome to Q&A each other. I'm also taking Q&As from audience members. you can go ahead and put Q&A into the Q&A box. I want to start with a question for all of you because I noticed similar things in your work. And Maya, I'm glad you referenced fragments from Jenny's Craft Talk, because one of the things I'm really interested in how all of your pieces worked was it's not exactly non sequiturs that I'm talking about. And I'm not talking about a traditional braid, right? But what I see this thing happening, and this has to do with surprise, right? As much as anything, but the combination of a kind of unexpected movement, unexpected objects that appear in your work, and yet how we have this kind of development. I wonder how you can talk about the process of, you know, creating something that feels complete and whole out of something that feels dangerous and fragmented and possibly never going to come together, or at least, you know, I would worry about it as a writer. What if you could try, and Jourdan, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I guess I don't worry about it coming together because it already had come together when I started thinking about it, because I tend to write about the things I obsess about. And
So did you already know? Because I was surprised when we got to that queen. And I was digging the repetition, I was digging the colors, I was digging all these other lines, and then we got places that I was surprised about, that seemed to begin to cohere things in an interesting way.
I think I can't remember how I came to learn about the queen, but probably because I was looking up something about slavery. And because I love whales, because once I learned that my ancestors were thrown in the ocean, and I learned that baleen whales are scooping the bottom, I thought, holy cow, you know, I couldn't ever stop thinking that. I don't know where that came from, but, or how I came across it, but I truly have hated that book my entire life. And that truly, I guess when I brought it up to my mom to fact check my memory, she remembered it the exact same way. So I guess my dad was telling the truth, but yeah, I mean, it was going somewhere. There was already the connection. So I don't know. I don't know if that's an actual answer.
Jourdan, I'm just going to follow that up a little bit. We did a class today. I had a class today in list stories. So we were dealing with lists, right? And your piece is a list, right? And it's a numbered list, which I like. I don't know, and I don't know why I like that. I like the sound of the numbers. I like the fact that, you know, the numbers are increasing. Did you, and I like the thought of the possibility of writing 1,000 numbered items in the list to get to 23 or whatever number you're going to get. Did you feel a freedom to write more items in the list that you then got rid of, or did you not write that many more?
Oh no, there were a lot more. And then I don't know if people noticed, but there was a couple of times where I used the same number, and not just 17, but 9 and 10. So I got the idea of enumeration because I enjoy Orion magazine, and they had started having a section with enumeration. Right? Alex Johnson, who's a friend and fellow writer there, thought, I like how you can move around and have people have the expectation that they'll be confused. But you know, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I like that screwing around with the form too, with the repetition of the numbers. That was cool.
It never escapes as a Black woman. There's not like I never stopped thinking about slavery, about my ancestors. Not like it never, ever stops. So no matter what I'm doing, I'm camping in the woods, and no matter what. So yeah. It's easier to make that.
Okay, Jenny, I'm asking you the same question if you can remember it.
Yeah, I think I do remember it, Sam. Thank you. So I think for me, it's several things, but first of all, I'm very curious. I want to find out what happens, right? So I want to know what happens if I just drop this in here. I may not have any plans. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but it seems like my mind is veering somewhere. Something is tugging at me. And so I will digress and I will go there. And I just like have faith that the essay has a wisdom greater than mine, that I can't see it close up. And so I just follow things out of curiosity, but I also, when I'm writing, it's more like a trance, or it's more like a reverie, and it's very dreamlike. And like in dreams, just random things will pop up in your head and you're in different places. And so as I'm writing, as I'm composing, something will suggest itself to me and I will just go with it and see what happens. So it's a lot like faith in that regard. It doesn't always work out. I do excise some passages that don't work, but they also lead me to different places as well, simply by following the essay's lead. So things pop into my head randomly all the time, and I just go with it.
I mean, I like what you're saying about digression, and I like following digression. I asked Stuart Diebeck once, I was like, I love how your work digresses. It's amazing to me how you get out, how you're able to resurface from the digression. He goes, oh, yeah, but what you're not seeing is all the times I didn't, that I wasn't able to get out of it. And I want to ask you if you have devices or techniques to help you resurface or reground from a digression. And I don't really think digression is the right word. We're using that word, and I used it with him, and I know you, and I understand how you used it, but you know what I mean.
Right. It's more like a maze or getting lost in the woods, right? And like, how do you find your way out when you're deep in it and it gets darker and deeper and there might be monsters or whatnot, right? But I think that like how I can resurface, and I love that we're using that word here with all the whale imagery in Jourdan and Maya's pieces, is that I make it a practice to continuously reread what I've written, because I think that like reading your drafts allows you to see what you maybe aren't seeing when you're composing. And it will allow me to see where I need to insert something, or where I need to move something around, or where I might need to like make a stronger connection for the reader and make it more explicit instead of implicit. So just the date, like just constantly rereading and obsessing over the drafts is how I can resurface.
And that's doing stuff for the sound and the song of the piece too, because you're so deep in the sound and the song of it that you're honing it and honing it. I really like that the object, the earring, the tattoo is going to become an image. It's almost an abstraction in a way in the piece, but the earring is so concrete, and I love that it's lost. And I love what you do with it with Holland. I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Just like that object. Maya, will you address the same question?
Yeah, I'm really glad I get to follow that progression of it too, because I was thinking about the ways that in Jourdan's essay, she mentioned that she repeats some of the numbers 9 and 10, 9 and 10, and that repetition is a way of not marrying oneself to the linear progression of number or of story. And then when you ask Jenny, how do you get out of the digression? My impulse is you don't. That the digression is where you really need to go, and that trying to pull yourself back. And I know that's not how you mean it. You don't mean digression, but I think if we allow ourselves to follow that path and just see where does it go, that may be where the essay or the poem or the story or whatever needs to head. And it needs to, as so many writers have said, surprise us. And I think about that moment in, in Frost's Birches. Okay, I'm thinking about Frost now. In Frost's Birches, where, he says the birches are bent over, like the girls throwing their hair back. And then he goes into that for a while, and then he comes back to the trees again. And I think, if I were writing that poem, I don't think I ever would have gone back to the trees. And maybe that's because I think I don't think that I learned to think in fragments. I think I was born that way. I think I was wired from my youth. I had an unconventional upbringing, and we were renters, or we were, living in a van. And so I think that the unfinished, the unexpected, the learning to cope with the surprise, the learning even to follow, sometimes they're sonic threads, sometimes they're imagistic threads. I think that my aesthetic ecosystem is based more in that rivulet, sheet wash, braid, messed up watershed where things are just crashing on each other and there could be a storm. More that than anything that's linear, more that than anything that's, a traditional arc of story. And so I think I was just really sitting here admiring Jenny and Jourdan for writing in that so beautifully. So yeah, that's all I have so far.
And Maya, I mean, I know exactly what you're saying, but I also think there's a deep satisfaction when something starts to ring and then it rings again and then it rings again. I'm thinking in Jourdan's piece that Jourdan, which number was it? The first, early on when we get the line, I hate Anne. I don't like Anne. I don't like Anne. What number is that?
4.
Yeah, that's really early, right? And when that line came up, that woke me up in a different way. Something happened to me with that line, and then now later we came back to her, and it was cool. And I like the way it rang. And Maya, I know you're not disagreeing with that. I just wanted to comment because I wanted to talk about that line that struck me so hard in Jourdan's. Melissa Kwasny has a good follow-up on this for all of you. She asked, do you think women are more comfortable with fragmentation? And if so, why? Kwasny says, I'm thinking about C.D. Wright, Carol Meso. I don't know how to say this name. M. Norbsby Phillip with her work Zong. So she's asking the question, are women more comfortable with fragmentation? And if you say yes, tell us why.
Well, Zong is saved on my stumbling laptop, taking up too much room, and I won't get rid of it. And Zong also deals with ancestors flung into the water. So I like the question, do women versus women writers? I think we live fragmented lives because of all the expectations and the ways that we move through the world to be safe, in the ways that we protect, the ways that we are trained to protect ourselves by one another, so that even when we're afraid, perhaps it doesn't show. We're kind of, I think we live fragmented lives more than perhaps men, but the men I know are more like women. They're not queer, but they're very aware of more than one world at the same time. I think it's hard to hold that. That's my thought on it.
Okay. Jenny?
Yeah, I'm kind of like mulling this over in my head, because one of my favorite writer in fragments is Roland Barthes, who, is male, but and had extreme amounts of leisure time. It's not as if he had to write in fragments. I mean, extreme amount of leisure. But I'm just wondering, sometimes I know for women that at a certain point in time in their lives, they must rely on the fragment in order to get any writing done, that if it weren't for fragmentary writing, the writing wouldn't get done. So it becomes a godsend in that way to continue one's artistic life and not despair. And we all know what happens when the lack of an artistic life leads to despair. So it's a way to hold on to a thread, I believe. But so I think like sometimes one's life lapses in such a way that the fragment is all one can do. And I think, women are primary caretakers in so many ways, not just to their children or their spouses or their parents or their workplaces. So yeah, I'm mulling this over a lot. It's making me think, obviously. So those are some of my initial thoughts.
Thank you, Jenny. Maya?
I was actually going to also talk about those who are caregivers, people who care for other people and people who birth humans, and how that does fragment a life. And I don't know that I can speak to a universal experience on this, because I think it's really hard. It's really difficult for me to say all women or women. And I know that's not the intent of Melissa's question. I know Melissa is obviously extremely capacious in this question, and it's such a good one. But in my experience, I have definitely tended toward the fragmented essay, in particular after having babies. And I do believe those things are linked for my experience. And I think they're linked specifically because of what Jenny pointed out. And I was thinking about that beautiful book of short stories by Sabrina Oramark, called Wild Milk. Her book is called Wild Milk. And she writes, I think of that. I'm just going to give a recommendation for fiction really fast. And she has a lot of list stories. She has a lot of really weird inside out stories, a lot of stories that make reference to celebrities, but she puts them into her stories. And the whole book is like this dream sequence, or it's like, when we say you go to a play date and you have a 2-sentence conversation in the space of 2 hours, you're like, yeah, I went to this play date and I talked to another parent and we talked for 2 hours, and people say, what'd you say? And you're like, these 2 sentences, this is what we got through in those 2 hours. And that's what that book feels like to me. And I know I'm not talking about essays now, I'm talking about fiction, but that book feels like someone was in a park and trying to have a conversation or write a story for the length of a book. And that was what they got out. And the interruption, just the ways that interruptions come in and come in and come in. And if you can work the interruptions into the ways so everything's congealing and, forming Congress in your head, then you can be funny, you can be sad, you can be all the things all at once. You can be of the body, you can be of the mind, but barely of the mind, just for a moment. And I think that brilliant minds, somebody asked me to repeat the author and title, so I'll say it's Sabrina Oramark, Wild Milk. And it's one of my favorite story collections. And I think, that's enough. I'll type it in.
All right, thank you guys. Oh, sorry, got it.
I was just
Thank
going to
you.
say the 2 men
Sorry,
I
go
thought of are caregivers. One is a kindergarten teacher and one takes care of the earth. So do they leave interrupted lives also? I love that language.
Yeah, the caregiver.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
both, it brings what both Jenny's saying and your experience.
Yeah. All right, beautiful dreamers. That was fantastic. Another excellent reading.